Hello everyone, we're here today with Lucy Crawford, who is the Executive Director of the Norton Foundation. Lucy, if you could start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into work with Norton's Foundation.
Okay. Well, as Andy said, I'm Lucy Crawford, and I have a background very unlike what most people come into foundation work for, and I, for 25 years, was a master's degree of social work and did marriage and family counseling, worked with troubled adolescents in a variety of locations. Did not have a private practice, however. I always worked for organizations. And then after 25 years, I was able to get the job as the director of the Norton Foundation, where I've been for 25 years. The Norton Foundation is a foundation set up by George and Jane Norton, who owned and ran Wave Radio and Television. And they sold that in the 80s and made a boatload of money and put it into trust. And so the trust corpus can never be touched, but the money that we give away in the community is all from the interest of that trust. The people that actually make the decisions about the foundation are called trustees, and these are all family members at this point. So there are third and fourth generation Norton family members. There are no Norton named people left, and the Norton Foundation has no connection with Norton Hospital, a totally different entity. We fund locally in Louisville and only do funding for children and primarily education, and out of education, primarily arts education, and now branching into agricultural information and education. And that pertains to the health and wellness of children and how they learn to eat and what foods they have access to and that type of thing, to try to tap into the child wellness program across the country, actually. But we fund only in Louisville and Jefferson County. We are a small private family foundation, and for every foundation that exists in Louisville, or across the nation probably, everyone is very different. There's really not something that you can say, this foundation does this and therefore all foundations do that, because there are corporate foundations, private foundations, and family foundations, and all run very differently. But I think basically there are some basics in that when you make application to a foundation for money to run a program that you're interested in, you need to know a little bit about the foundation. So you need to have gone to that foundation's website, and if you're going to ask the Norton Foundation, for example, money for a capital campaign, you would learn that on our website we do not fund capital campaigns, so that would be a waste of time and energy for you. So the first thing to do is to visit the foundation's webpage. And many foundations today, although not a lot locally, do electronic grant making, but the Norton Foundation is not one of those. But you can find out a host of information on the webpage. The next thing you do is you make an appointment with the person, in that case, in the Norton Foundation's case, that's me, to sit down and talk about your particular project, and I would tell you as best I could what would be the pros and cons of that application, and if it would be worth your while to make application. The Norton Foundation gets probably 200 plus applications every year, and we fund about 20, so maybe a 10–15% approval rate, and really that's only because of limited money. Of the foundations that make, or the organizations that make application to the foundation, probably 80% or 85% are relevant to our mission. We just don't have enough money to fund that. So after an application is made, and if you get an approval, that's the best of all possible worlds. If you get a denial, I would encourage you to call me or whoever else works at the other foundation and flesh that out a little bit. What would be the cause that you didn't get approved, or didn't get approved? I would not be able to tell you specifics of what the trustees talked about, but I could probably give you a ballpark idea of what you might need to know if you make application again.
when it comes to making the decision of who you guys will fund, what kind of things do the trustees discuss and take into account?
Well, oftentimes they take into account the history that we have with the organization, and since we are a small foundation and trust only in Louisville, fund only in Louisville, a lot of the organizations we fund year in and year out. So it's really important that that relationship continues to be developed between the applicant organization and with me. My trustees in particular don't go at this point and visit organizations, so it's all through me. So they look for clarity of communication. If you can read an application and understand it clearly, that's probably the biggest key. And everyone thinks that they're making an application that's clear, but in my case, my trustees are not physicians or educators. They're ordinary people, and so you want to avoid jargon that is specific only to your organization or to your education project that you're working on. So a lot of things, you don't want to use acronyms and words that are not used on the street. So you really have to have an application that is clearly written. And then the second thing, which you would think that everyone would follow but don't, is follow the directions. Probably 30% of the applications I receive, if not more, haven't followed the directions. So I have to call the organization and say, I need a copy of your 501c3, or I need a copy of your budget, or I need a copy of this or that. Those are things that wouldn't preclude you from getting a grant, but it just takes time and everyone's time. So follow the directions. And then I think it's also important to my trustees in particular to tell a story about your organization, or to tell a story about little John or Mary or whoever that is going to be improved by the grant that you receive. Everyone can read and understand and get touched by a story. So I don't want 10 stories, but 2 or 3 stories are really helpful.
You touched on some of this, but are there other mistakes that you see nonprofits make in applications to your foundation?
I do see the mistake being made of making application to an organization that's not going to fund you. It seems to me that there are some organizations that just say you need to fill out 50 applications this year. So they would send an application to the Norton Foundation, for example. I pick on the Red Cross sometimes because we never fund them, and not because they aren't an exemplary organization, but because we don't have, they don't fit into our mission. But let's say the Red Cross applies to the Norton Foundation every year. To what point is that? You know, we're not going to fund you. You know that. That's happened in the past. You've read our web page, or obviously not read the web page. So just making unnecessary applications. And I think another thing that applicants can do is really get as much information as you can from the applicant organization, not only from the web page, but talk to the executive director or the grants manager, and try to get that application the best you can do to find out really specifically what that foundation is looking for.
What do you love about your job?
Oh my goodness. My job is the best job on the planet because Louisville, as every community, is full of tragic circumstances and very difficult problems. But I get to go out and see the people that are trying to do something about that. So it's very positive. I meet people that are inspired, people that are dedicated, people that are committed, people that are just trying to make their community a better place. So it's a very positive job. There's nothing about my job that's not good.
Great. Once you've decided to fund an organization, what do you expect from them at that point?
After a decision is made to fund an organization, I will send out a contract to the organization, and this contract just says, basically in 2 pages written by lawyers, that you have to use the money you get for the money that we have agreed upon. And then you sign that and send it back to me, and it's in the file. And so we expect, when we send money to Organization A to feed children in an after-school program, that's what we expect the money to be used for, and would need corroboration of that at the end of the year, or at the end of whenever the expenditure of the funds is over. So at the end of your using that money, I would require a form or a report. Doesn't have to be long, just telling how the funds were used, what you think the result was, and thanking us for the money.
Do you expect to be recognized in some way by the organization?
You know, some organizations do and some don't. We do not necessarily, although we aren't, prohibit people from putting our name up. And then there are some organizations that want their name on everything. I listened to a speech yesterday from David Jones, founder of Humana, and they don't want their name on anything. Now, this is the David Jones Private Family Foundation, not Humana. So it ranges from no recognition at all to wanting as much recognition as you can get. And it differs with every foundation. I find that mostly the corporate foundations need and want more recognition, understandably, for their grants, but not always.
Lucy, the folks who are watching this video are students in my nonprofit management class. Some of them are currently working in the nonprofit field, and some want to work in the nonprofit field in the future. What advice would you have for students looking to go into a career in the nonprofit world?
A career in the nonprofit world and not in the foundation world is your question.
Or either or. Yeah.
Either or. Well, a career in the foundation world, unfortunately, is very difficult. Most people get their jobs because of who they know, not always, but often. I worked in the nonprofit field for 25 years, differing from the foundation work that I do now. And the main thing someone needs to be in the nonprofit world is to have a big heart and a commitment and be educated. And if you can do all those three, then I think you'll be successful. You need to realize that the benefits from that job are probably not going to be monetary for the most part, but they will be long on satisfaction. I remember in many things about my work as a social worker for 25 years, and still have some relationships with the people I worked with way back then, which is interesting. Some, of course, that were children then are now in their 40s, so that's a curious thing. And sometimes you hear back from people 15 years after you've been with them about what an impact you made on their life. So that's awesome. If you're going into therapy, the more education you can get specifically about that, more clinical experience you can get, I think the better. If you're going to an administration, administration has changed dramatically over the years, as you are finding out, and more people need business acumen and abilities to understand budgets and 990s and all kinds of things that go along with managing a business. Because if you are in a nonprofit management position, you are managing a business. And years ago that was a dirty word, but that's the reality of it today.
Thanks a lot for your time, Lucy. Any final comments?
Well, I wish you well. I was sitting in your seat about 45 years ago, and I'm very appreciative of all the people that are working in the nonprofit world. We need you. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Lucy.
It's painless.